Hello and welcome to my TTArtisan's 75mm f2 review. This autofocus full frame lens is currently available in both the Nikon Z mount and the Sony E mount. So what's great about this lens? Well, the price for one. This lens costs under $200 or €200, and it's also an autofocus lens that's light and easy to carry around. Now, if you're thinking this lens is super cheap, so it must be rubbish, then brace yourselves for a bit of a shock. It's not. In fact, I really like this lens. It has a lovely look and feel to it, and it's capable of delivering lovely creamy backgrounds, and for the price, that's truly remarkable. Now, I'll be testing this TTArtisan's 75mm f2 lens on my Nikon Z8, and I'll be running it through all the sample shots I have with it. I'll be covering things like sharpness, distortion, vignetting, focus speed, focus breeding, flare, and of course bokeh too as well. So come on, let's get into it and I'll walk you through this lens and why it surprised me. So this is the box it comes in, and inside the box you have the lens hood, and the thing you might miss here is the USB dock is actually included in the actual end cap. So there's a USB dock, USB-C port here, that's included in the actual rear end cap, and that is really handy. Now that's there for softer updates and for future updates for the lens itself. So talking about construction now, this is a good time to talk about build quality. And I've been using this TTArtisan's 75mm f2 lens for nearly a month now. And the one thing I noticed straight away about it is its build quality. As soon as you take it out of the box, this solid metal body is very reassuring to hold.
As you can see here now, the build quality on this lens is simply great. In fact, when you look at it like this, you wouldn't know that this lens was not manufactured by one of the premium manufacturers like Nikon, Sony or Canon. So well done, TTArtisan.
Then we have this large focus ring here, which is nice and smooth. The focus throw on this lens is roughly about 100 to 120 degrees, but this is also speed dependent. In other words, the slower you turn this ring, the more you need to turn it to travel the full focal plane. This means you could quickly whip the focus ring into roughly the focus position you want, and then slowly position it for ultimate precision. The aperture ring here is again solid and feels relatively robust, with solid clicks as you change the aperture in 1/3 stops. Now, a point to note here is you can't declick or switch off these rotational clicks. But just to be clear though, when you're using it in auto mode where the camera changes the aperture, there is no clicking as the aperture changes. One thing I would like to see here though is a lock actually on the aperture ring, so it won't accidentally pop off auto while you're wondering for a second or two why you can't change your aperture in your camera afterwards. And just to give you an idea, that's the rotational clicking noise. And this lens will go from f2 to f16. Now to put it in auto, very straightforward, just you have a little white line here, swing it all the way around until the red A is lined up with the white dot, and that's it, you're done. It's now on auto, and the camera can actually adjust the aperture then to whatever it wants.
So to mount the lens on the camera, you can see there's a red dot here on the base, and that red dot lines up with the white line for your aperture ring. So what you do is you just line up the white line there again with the white dot on the camera itself, line the two of them up, pop the lens in, twist it, and it locks in place as normal.
So this brings us to the TTArtisan's 75mm f2 lens hood. While it serves its purpose very well, it does feel just a tiny little bit cheap. And if you don't line it up quite right, it can slip past the groove on the lens and it'll actually go onto the lens, more than it's supposed to. And yes, that's a minor quirk. And I'm being very picky here now. If you line it up carefully, it pops on and off absolutely perfectly every single time. Now, the other nice thing with this is you can actually pop the lens hood on backwards too as well. So you can actually store it. Give me a second. There we go. You can actually store it on the lens then too as well. So it makes it more compact when you're traveling around. Now the point to remember in all this is an incredibly cheap 75mm f2 lens. so you have to expect slight issues like this, and I would much prefer the lens performs well as it does, and the accessories are the parts that I'm not falling in love with. Looking at focus next, and the focus speed is fast, and while focusing, this lens is also quiet while delivering very good focus accuracy. This lens also works well with eye and subject detection, so all positives here. Now, as I repeatedly focus backwards and forwards here now, you can see it works quickly, and it's also very positive while locking onto the subject with minimal hunting. The STM motor is what powers the speed, gives it its accuracy and quiet operation. As I'm doing this now, you will notice that there is some focus breathing in the lens, so for video shooters, that's something to bear in mind. But as I say, its focus mechanism is fairly quiet, so that's also a positive. So this all brings us now to performance, and this is the part that surprised me. This lens is sharp, and it's more than sharp enough for anyone looking to start shooting portraiture or to buy and use a prime lens. Now, it's not the sharpest lens I have here, obviously, and when I started this review originally a few weeks ago, I did the technical test charts first, as I always do, and I will show you those results in a few minutes. But the results were good, but not mind-blowingly good. It was only when I started to use this lens in real-world situations that I found this is not necessarily about technicalities or super sharp, pristine images. This lens is more about the look and feel you get from it, and all at a relatively fantastic price.
So here we have our test chart now, and let's zoom into the center and check the sharpness at f2. And as you can see, this looks very good. At f2.8 now, it's a bit sharper. And at f4, it's slightly sharper again. f5.6 is the sharpest for center sharpness. As at f8 here now, there is no improvement. And at f11, it starts to soften ever so slightly now. Looking at corner sharpness now, and at f2, the corners, as you would expect, are soft. At f2.8, there is an overall good increase in sharpness, and at f4 now, it gets sharper again. At f5.6, sharpness is really good, and those minor details are starting to pop now. At f8, it improves again, but only slightly. At f11 then, sharpness starts to soften ever so slightly. So for me, f5.6 is very good, with f8 just being ever so fractionally better for corner sharpness.
The more I use this lens, the more I like its rendering and character. This is a great compact 75mm lens that is fantastic at taking portraits and also as a general purpose telephoto carry around lens. It's as simple as that. Let me show you what I mean here. So here is a photograph of Dobby shot at f2, and as you can see, it keeps Dobby's eyes sharp but also renders a nice soft creamy background. This is what the same photograph looks like at f16. I purposely put some random items in the background to kind of mess it up a bit. As you can see, the f2 photograph has melted away in the background and blended into a far more photogenic one. Now, as I'm shooting smaller subjects, this is a very good time to mention the minimum focusing distance, and going back to the photo here now again of Dobby, this was as close as I could get to Dobby without losing focus on the eyes, as the closest focusing distance is 75 centimeters. Now again, for portraits, that's perfect and not an issue at all. But if you like more close-up macro work, then this is something to consider, as it won't get you close enough to your subject. You can also see in the f16 photograph, this lens produces some nice starbursts around the light sources in the image, so that's another positive for this lens. Speaking of starbursts, let me show you this photograph of the sun there now, and you will notice the lens does have a bit of flaring in it, as you can see here, and also here with the colour abnormalities there also. So that's one slight thing to look out for. This, by the way, was by far the worst flaring I could get from this lens, and I had to mess around with it a lot to get it this bad. So it shouldn't show up like this for you normally. Now, one of the nice characteristics of this lens is that when it's wide open, it does ever so slightly lack a tiny bit of contrast, which again for most portraiture is a nice touch. Stopping it down to f2.8 or even better f4 does kill this lack of contrast then though. Now looking at this example photograph, you can see how the strong backlighting has brightened the branch and reduced the overall contrast in the scene. This is kind of what I'm talking about. Now what I have found is it all just helps to give this lens a bit more of a light, airy feel to it. And I can't help but liking the look I get from it, especially for portraits. That's a really nice little touch.
Looking at portraits here now, and I pop my model in front of an old shade that badly needs to be painted to give you an idea of how any background can look well with this lens. And no, these are not beautiful photographs, but they serve the purpose of showing you how well this lens works. Again, these are both shot at f2. The slight absence of serious contrasts help to take the edge off the background too as well.
Now let's have a look at some more shots there now and how this lens translates the light for you. Now as you can see, there is a nice soft kind of a filmic kind of a feel to all the backgrounds, which is something you oftentimes miss from modern ultra precise or clinical lenses. Now don't get me wrong, I love super sharp lenses, but they're not always what you want to use, or they may also not just suit your particular style of photography. So how does this lens work and how does it produce images like this? Well, the 10 elements are there to minimize distortion and vignetting. So let's check out how it did in those points in our test charts now. As you can see, and as you would expect from most lenses, when shot wide open, there is some vignetting there. This can be easily corrected in your editing software though, so it's not an issue at all. Once you stop the lens down to f2.8, f4 and f5.6, you kill off that vignetting completely, as you can see here. There is some distortion there also, and it's pincushion distortion, but if you're going to have distortion in a portrait lens, that's the one to have, as it will help ever so slightly to help slim those faces a small bit for you. Now you can of course again correct this distortion in a split second in post-processing, so neither vignetting or distortion are an issue at all. As we're looking at test charts, let's check out chromatic aberration next. Now chromatic aberration is there, but it's kept under control to a large part, and as you can see in this test chart here, we are getting some fringing here in the corners, but again, this is easily corrected, so not an issue at all. So overall, I have to say the TTArtisan's 75mm f2 lens is light, it's compact and gives great results. It's perfect for anyone looking to get into portrait photography, and I for one really like it. For value for money, this lens has to be one of the best portrait lenses out there right now. So if you're thinking about getting it, then I for one think you'll really enjoy using it. Thanks again for watching, and see you out there, or see you in the next video.